fired up and ready to learn some stuff and participate with us. That's really terrific. As you know, this is the second in a three-part series. Today we're going to be talking about industry-funded research. We've already spoken a bit about intellectual property last week, and we have one more of these sessions coming up this semester where we'll be discussing entrepreneurship. So we're pretty excited about all of this. I wanted to start off with just a few things to get the ball rolling this morning that kind of talks about the why. Why do we care about industry-funded research? And I could just speak first personally. In 1986, I was fortunate enough to receive the NSF Presidential Young Investigator Award. I was a 30-year-old assistant professor who had worked in industry, and I was at the University of Delaware in chemical engineering in the heart of the industry. And part of the PYR award was set up as follows. You got the first $30,000 or so just for showing up, just for getting the award. And then $35,000 was also available to you from the NSF if you could match it with industry funding. Well, that set me on a course, and it was intentional. Eric Bloch was running the NSF in those days, and he was trying to turn the corner and get more connectivity between the NSF and industry and the real economy. To his credit, he had come out of IBM, and he kind of designed that program. So for a lot of us, Eric Kaler, who's now president of Minnesota, also a PYI, in the 80s, this became the thing to do. And we had to get good at it. We had to get good at it really quickly if we wanted to be able to get the full $100,000 a year from the NSF for 5 years, which in those days was a lot of money. It really was. It was great. So that was my beginning in all of this. And I had sat on both sides of the table, so to speak, which is to say that early in my career, I had been, after a postdoc, I had worked in industry, and I'd worked with faculty members and given them money and so forth and tried to promote their research. And then, of course, I switched to the other side of the table as an academic. That was back in the 80s. Today, things have changed even more and have made the climate even more favorable, if you will, for us to be working with industry. And maybe it's a couple of things. One of them is this, and that is this guy in the corner here, not the top corner, although that's kind of interesting too. That's Bob Dylan. Back in 1964, that's what he looked like then, and he told us the times were changing. If this works right, that's what he looks like now, and the times really have changed for Bob. But that's not who I really want to point to. That's just for fun. What I really want to point to is this guy right here. He is a premier physicist. He's a physicist, MIT and Harvard trained, John Holdren. And a number of you probably know of him. And John is the assistant to the president for science and technology. He runs OSTP. So he's the vice chancellor for research for the whole country, right? He's that guy. He's the guy who really sets the tone. He's the guy that all of us who are senior research officers really listen to and read what he writes, because if you want to really be on the cutting edge and on the cusp of what's going on in the agencies, you look to this guy. He sets the tone, then people like Francis Collins pick up on that and continue to sort of write about it and discuss it in their own words. But here's what Holdren's been saying. This is a little bit 2010, but it's consistent since then. He says it's essential to document with solid evidence the return our nation is obtaining from its investment in research and development. First time in my career I've ever heard anybody of this stature say that. Up until now, it's been implicit. You know, we've been on the great path that Vannevar Bush started with his report, Science, the Endless Frontier, about 1948, 49, somewhere in that range. And it was always implicitly assumed that research would be funded in the United States and that it would be very fundamental, and that we assumed almost religiously that it would lead to good things. And it did. It led to a lot of great things. But today, like everything else, everything's being scrutinized, and scrutinized carefully because, frankly, we're just not as prosperous as we once were. And that's what gives rise to a lot of this. For those of you who haven't looked at it, Star Metrics is a program that we actually participate in. It's a voluntary program. Jim English is the faculty fellow in our office who actually does this for us. And what he does is he tabulates in a Star Metrics way all the different things we do that have impact on the economy and sort of divides all of that by the number of dollars of research we get from the federal government. The reason this is so important to you all is that right now, if your proposal is competing with someone else's proposal at NIH or NSF, and you're at a school that shows up, and let's say they're equivalent, it's a toss-up as to which one to fund. The program manager is now going to look at the university and make some judgment on the economic likelihood of impact of that investment by the federal government at one university versus the other. So the better that we get at this, and the more quickly we get better at transferring what comes out of our R&D, our research and development, into things that are metricized, if you will, by star metrics, the more likely you are to be funded. If we don't do it well, the less likely you are to be funded, even if your research is really good. This is all part of broader impacts. We have Susan Reno here. Susan, want to wave your hand and say hello? Susan runs the Broader Impacts Network for us, both here at MU, but she's also plugged in with NSF nationally. That is hugely valuable to us and very important. All of these pieces start to come together then as we start to realize that the government is quite serious on both sides of the aisle at looking at what's happening with research at universities. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some of you have seen some of the scrutiny that NSF has gotten recently. I'm not sure I'm too keen on that. I think NSF has worked pretty well. You may not agree with everything they do. Some of us are a little torqued off when we don't get funded by them. But by and large, they've done a great job for a long time. My only point bringing that up is everything is on the table and being scrutinized today. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, essentially, we're being looked at as an engine of innovation to replace those big laboratories that were once funded by AT&T, RCA, DuPont, and others that, for the good of society and the like, did fundamental research. They don't do it anymore. As a result, universities are being asked to pick up that activity for the country. It's a good idea. And in a sense, we could kind of measure the size of our engine or anyone's engine by looking at our, quote, research expenditures, which are revenues. And you can see MU is here. We're just at about $230 million a year. Half of that, though, is ours, right? Half of that is our own investment in our own research. That concerns me a little bit. That means we're getting about a 1-to-1 ratio. A dollar comes in, and we put a dollar out. I'd like to see that ratio go up, right? It should be higher. I'd like to see the total displacement of our engine go up, if you will. It should be higher. But it's a hard time to do that. It's a hard time to do that because we're in a period where the U.S. is not investing new dollars into R&D development at the federal level, right? You can find this everywhere. So we're in a time of constrained dollars from the federal government, and I think all of us have felt some of that. And we've also seen the NIH redirect money from very fundamental research to more translational research, again, having more impact, more relevance, if you will. I'm not sure I like that, but I can't change it, so I'm trying to help us adapt to it. And as a result, I think industry-funded research becomes a really important option for us. It becomes an alternative source of funding for us. It becomes an opportunity for us to really build relationships that could be very valuable to us over the long term and to you as individual faculty members over the long term. You know, I've worked in my field, many of the people that are colleagues work in places like Belgium and Holland, and I'm always amazed by how well they're able to work with industrial laboratories, whether they're physicists, chemists, engineers, what have you. They seem to make that work very, very nicely in Europe. And I kind of like that model, and a number of us do. And if we could get to a place closer to that in the U.S., I think things would be much healthier. And in fact, we'd see more innovation and prosperity. That said, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get us a step closer to understanding what are the good ways to interact with industry, how can we team with them, what are the benefits. Some of the benefits are things like this. You know, it's amazing as an academic to walk into an industrial laboratory as a consultant or as a colleague, a collaborator, and begin to work on some of their problems with them. And what it does is it sort of creates new thinking in your own mind about fundamental research that you could do back at the university that will help to solve very applied problems that are frankly very deep. That's one benefit. Another benefit is, rubbing shoulders with people who are practitioners has a nice way of rubbing off on us, and we can bring some of that into the classroom when we're teaching. That's another benefit. Being able to tell students, particularly undergraduates, that you have connectivity to industry really raises your credibility with them. Not so much for grad students, they don't care about it, but for undergrads it's huge. And particularly in the applied sciences and engineering, that's very, very true. A third thing is those kinds of connections, if we build them and build them well, can really help us to help students find excellent positions when they graduate, whether they're undergraduates or graduates. So all of those things combine together, right? The fact that funding at the federal level isn't growing, the fact that there are some real non-tangible, well, tangible but not monetizable benefits, and finally the opportunity to use those dollars from industry to help support yourself, to help support your students, your laboratory, undergraduates, instrumentation is really very, very important to us. Okay. The key to this, though, is we can't do it all on our own, right? We really have to work with our partners in industry out in the community. So I call this communivation because community-university partnerships for innovation takes too long. So it's called communivation. That's us, we're the engine, but if that engine is not connected to a transmission and the transmission to the wheels, we don't get any traction in the real economy, right? So we have to have that traction. So this is really crucial to us, that transmission. That transmission is our friends and colleagues out there in the real world, so to speak, outside of academia, in small companies, medium-sized companies, and large companies. And I can tell you from experience, working with these people is really, really fun and can be very beneficial. But again, it's dependent on who you're working with, it's dependent on how you set it up, and it's dependent on what the expectations are. It takes time to figure all of that out. And that's part of what we're going to try to do today is give you some insights into how to make that happen. I'm really happy that we have some folks from the community who've come in here and are listening to this and hearing us talk about this, because I'm hoping that we could start locally. Communivation has to start locally. We have to be able to work with companies in our own backyard, help them get even better than they are today, help them help us get better, and then from there, this thing can flourish and grow. So what are we talking about? We're talking about activities that are really at the locus of community with all of its strengths, university, and money from federal and state agencies. So, of course, you can have an engine, you can have a transmission, you can have wheels, but if you don't have fuel for that engine, forget about it. Nothing happens. The more powerful the engine, the more fuel it takes, but also the more traction and work you could do in the economy. And that's what we're trying to do, is to create that kind of an upward spiral. So we have a 5-part sort of strategy that we're working on. And I say this to everyone. Some of you have heard it before. I keep telling you what I'm going to tell you and tell you again and tell you what I told you. And I talk to community groups all around the state all the time about this stuff. But first, it's work together for synergy across Missouri, right? That means academic synergies. That means university industry synergies, wherever we can find them. Second, grow our own entrepreneurs and innovators. We're working on that, folks. And if you saw the poster outside, you know, in fact, that there are lots of opportunities for those of you who want to do this. For the undergrads, we just started a new program. We'll be announcing 12 new people who are entrepreneurial scholars and innovators from around the system. We'll be announcing that probably next week. All right, for those of you who are faculty members, I call that re-engineering our culture to unleash the power of the willing. If you're here today, you're probably part of that. And, you know, that can take off in ways that are really terrific. So we'll be providing you with a one morning, you know, sort of an introduction to entrepreneurship. Then there'll be one-day courses in entrepreneurship, and ultimately even 8-week courses in entrepreneurship, a real boot camp, if you will, for those of you who want to do that, for grad students, postdocs, we really want to push this and tell you that, you know, if we were ambivalent about this in the past, we weren't clear whether we thought this was a good thing, or maybe we were clear that we thought it wasn't a good thing, we want to change that culture, right? We want to turn it around and make it a good thing. It's a social responsibility, and it's the fourth column of our mission at this university, economic development. Being shrewd and smart with intellectual property is something we've also done. We've had a certain inflexibility for 30 years. We're not going to be inflexible anymore. We're going to be flexible. We're letting faculty tell us whether or not we should protect the intellectual property or fight over that when we're at the contract negotiation stage, rather than us telling you. You tell us whether we should or should not. And we'll live by that. We'll abide by that. If you'd rather have the funding and the net present value of that funding today is more valuable to you than the apparent but not yet real future value of something that hasn't been invented, and you feel that way strongly, and you could say the things that I just said about net present value and future value, then we're going to go with you. All right? We're going to go with you, and we're going to say, fine, let this go. Don't fight over it anymore. I'm also working on things like sovereign immunity clauses and the location of litigation, which are two other things that come up in contracts with industry. It'll take a little further time to do that, but I think we'll get there on that too. So we're working on these things. We want to be more flexible. We want to make it more easy for you to work with industry and to bring in those dollars. And lastly, don't be jealous, consult and borrow from the successful. We're going to start a program here at MU working with MIT's venture mentoring system. Now, a lot of this is new, and it's exciting, and you've got to have the right kind of leadership and team members to make that happen. I'm happy to say we have those people here today. Steve Wyatt. Steve is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Economic Development and everything else I asked him to do. Steve's background is that he has a JD and an MBA, so he's a double threat, if you will, that way. And he seems to know everyone in the state of Missouri that's interested in this kind of stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing Steve do a lot of great things with us. We've just reorganized the Office of Research in a way that we bring together the Office of Technology Management with the Office of Sponsored Programs, together with broader impacts, together also with STAR metrics. So those pieces are now all in one place. I'm really looking forward to some of the ideas that Steve has for engaging industry and for driving entrepreneurship coming to fruition over the next year or so. Then I'd like to point out Jay Kwan. Jay Kwan is a faculty member here who is going to give a testimonial on some of the things that he has done with industry and sort of share some of his experiences with you. Chris Fender, a man who needs no introduction, many of you know, who really handles all of the technology management issues for us and has done a marvelous job of that for a number of years here at MU. Craig David, who runs the Office of Sponsored Programs. Craig, great to have you here this morning. Craig's going to tell you about some of the new approaches and how easy it makes it to cut a contract with an industrial sponsor with these new approaches. And then Jen May, who's going to talk to you about managing some conflicts of interest. Now, conflict of interest sounds inherently bad. I hate the term, but I can't do much about it. We've tried to think of different names like confluence of opportunity, but the key thing is, well, look, where there's no conflict, there's no interest. Where there's interest, there's always a conflict. But it sounds so creepy, right, to people. It does to me. I don't want to have a conflict of interest, but you almost all have conflicts of interest to some degree every day. And the key is we have to get to a place where we manage those conflicts and we openly report them and we go forward, having them and living with them and prospering. You know, it's sort of like the board meeting I was at yesterday for the Missouri Innovation Center. And we were talking about creating a conflict of interest policy there as well. And, you know, the very same things that create the conflict of interest are the very same things that make a board member a really good board member, right? The same things that are going to create that, quote, conflict of interest for you as a faculty member are the very same things that probably make you an extraordinarily valuable faculty member. So we're going to try to get beyond thinking negatively about this and starting to think positively about it, and that's why Jen's here today, to begin to talk about that in that way. So without further ado, what I would like to do is to turn this over to our next speaker this morning. And I believe that transition is to whom?
Me.
Craig, right. That's what it says right here. And I wanted to double check. So I'd like to introduce Craig, who's the director of the Office of Sponsored Programs. Craig, it's all yours. Do you want this, or are you going to use that? Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. You here? Okay. Thanks for the introduction. We're going to talk about industry research, industry funding. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face with industry. And we're also going to talk about what are we doing here at MU? What are we doing to solve those challenges? What are we doing to take advantage of industry funding? So first of all, as Dr. Foley indicated, federal funding hasn't been increasing. And here at MU, last year, fiscal year 14, our sponsored programs expenditures declined 10% to approximately $200 million. So, is that alarming? We all know that we value our status in the AAU, we value our membership in the AAU, and one of the metrics is expenditures, federal expenditures specifically. So is that alarming? It is alarming. It's alarming for us. Are we the only ones in that boat? No, we're not. Research institutions across the country are facing the same challenges we are. When you look at Washington University's expenditures, they're down approximately 10% as well. And so the point I want to make is that historically, federal funding has been the lifeblood of research institutions, that we rely on federal funding for what we do. So when we look at the scarcity of resources now, when we look at declining funding, we have to ask ourselves, is that sustainable for the future? Are we going to be able to always rely on federal funding in the proportion that we rely on it today? And I think for the first time, we're really not certain. There's definitely uncertainty out there. So there goes the benefits of partnering with industry. Universities, what do we do well? We have some very talented PIs, investigators, discovery and invention. That's what we do well. What does industry do well? They take discovery and invention and they translate that into goods and services that the public at large wants to buy. I mean, that's the definition of innovation. It's taking discovery and invention and making products that people want to buy. And when that occurs, that's a good thing. That's a win-win for everybody. There's a societal benefit. I was looking at my iPhone. I was trying to come up with an example for this group. I'm like, this iPhone that I have in my pocket makes my life a lot better. There's a lot of invention there that somebody's translated into a product that I'm willing to buy. And it was funny because after I thought of this, I opened my iPhone bill or my phone bill. It was over $400 for my family, and I thought, am I really better off? Am I really better off with teenagers? I look back to the time where I had a $15 landline phone and really questioned that. But nonetheless, I'm willing to pay that fee and I'm willing to buy that phone. So when we can partner with industry and innovation occurs, that's a win-win for everybody. Society benefits. And in addition, we develop good relationships with industry that could create job opportunities for our students in the state of Missouri. Now, is this important? Why is this important when it comes to federal funding and federal agencies? And Dr. Foley touched on this, is the federal government is communicating more and more, NSF specifically, that they value innovation. As resources become more scarce, they're looking at how can we get the most bang for our buck, similar to what we would do as individuals or a business would do. If we're going to invest in research and development, we want to make sure that we have a positive impact on society. Therefore, if we can succeed in partnering with industry in that innovation, as Dr. Foley indicated, then we can bolster our position to obtain federal funding in the future. He mentioned STAR Metrics. My office is involved with Jim English. We help him put together the data for STAR Metrics, and basically we take our award data and we pump it into STAR Metrics, and it pumps out reports that says this is the economic benefit that you made in your state or in the area. And the federal government, specifically NIH and NSF, is involved in this project. They're paying attention to those metrics. And so we want to make sure that we're in the forefront and we have that opportunity to take advantage of that. And not only do we want to have hard metrics where we say we're making an impact, we want to bolster our reputation. We want to communicate this message to the state of Missouri, who, elect the legislature. We want to be leaders in the industry. We want people to talk about Missouri. And so that when the federal agencies, they will realize our reputation as well, as in addition to the hard metrics, and we bolster our opportunity for federal funding in the future. All right, what are some of the challenges we have when it comes to industry funding? One of the first one that's really near and dear to me is bad debt and accounts receivable, because my office is responsible for invoicing sponsored agreements. When we have a federal project or a federal grant, I don't lose any sleep. I know that we're going to get paid. It's definitely risk-free. We can spend $100 in the morning on a federal project, and by noon I can get online and I can draw that $100 for an NSF project or an NIH project. We don't have to wait on deliverables to be met. That's not always the case with industry-sponsored agreements. Industry usually has a specific deliverable that they're looking for. We've had situations where we've gotten to the end of a project, industry says, you didn't do the scope of work that we expected. We're not going to pay you. Go to PI. PI says, I absolutely did the scope. Not only did I do the scope, I did additional work. My work was stellar. What do we do? We're in a situation where the sponsor won't pay. Do we litigate? Is it a $10,000 agreement? Is it $1 million agreement? Does that matter? If we come to an impasse and we decide we can't recover that money, who's going to pay? Do we go to the investigator? Say, do you have discretionary funds where you're going to come up with the money? Do we go to the department? Do I go to Dr. Parker in the med school and ask him at the college level? Do we handle that centrally? We also come into situations where everybody does everything right. Everybody's happy. Industry partner, excited about the scope of work, excited about our deliverable. However, they've made some bad choices and now they're not a viable company. They'd like to pay. Now they're bankrupt. They can't pay. Nobody's at fault. How do we handle that? So that's a different problem than we deal with industry-funded research that we don't deal with the federal government. So Hank and I have had discussions with Rhonda Gibler on how do we handle this. And right now we look at it on an individual basis. We look at the facts and we try to make a determination on how to handle that bad debt. Another issue that we dealt with, we actually had a meeting yesterday, is as a state institution, we're able to issue tax-exempt bonds, which lowers our costs of borrowing. But when we do that, there's limitations on the amount of private use that can occur in those buildings. If we enter into a contract with industry and we waive intellectual property rights, the IRS determines that that's private use. Okay? So we have to track that. Are we anywhere near the threshold that would get us in trouble when it comes to issuing tax-exempt bonds? We're not, but we still have an obligation to track the private uses going on in our buildings for the ones that are financed with tax-exempt bonds. And this building is a good example. Part of this building was funded with tax-exempt bonds. What are we going to be able to do with the data from the project? Are we going to be able to publish it? Are we going to be able to use it in the classroom? Is there any limitations on that in the contract? A lot of times with industry contracts, industry really wants to limit what we can do with the results. I've seen a lot of clauses where they define confidential information as all results of the project. Well, that essentially means that we can't publish. We can't use it in the classroom. Is that a good thing? Can we accept that? Sometimes we can. Is it another sponsored activity? Is it a service contract? It may be appropriate for a service contract. If it's a research and development contract, is that something that we want to agree to? Probably not. The length of time it takes. When we get a federal grant, we accept it, unilateral terms and conditions, we don't negotiate it. When it comes to industry contracts, those can vary in the length of time of negotiation. Industry has a desire to get those things in place really quick. Also, our investigators have a desire to get those in place really fast. When they in principle agree with industry, they want to get that contract in place. They want to hire their grad students. They want to start buying stuff and start working. And so when we have to stop and negotiate terms, it's not advantageous for our investigators, and it's definitely not advantageous for industry. So what are some of the things that we're doing and changing here at MU to try and take advantage of industry contracts? And Hank mentioned, we want to empower investigators to make decisions on intellectual property. We don't want to take the first position every time that we need to own intellectual property. We want to engage the investigator in that discussion and ask, are you going to develop something you want to protect? Is there any background intellectual property that we need to protect? So we want to have the PI assistance in that decision making. We want to give them the tools, though, to make an informed decision on IP. And if it makes sense to waive our intellectual property rights, we're going to do it. One of the methods that we have a new 2-page contract. So we have what we feel is a industry-friendly contract. So if we know up front that we're going to do a scope of work and we don't need to protect intellectual property rights, the contract states in the contract that we're not going to own the intellectual property. So we have that contract that we hope we can execute quickly, because again, industry wants to execute it quickly, and so does our investigator. We revised BPM 203. Business Policy 203 indicated that if we waived IP, we had to recover 200% F&A. We've eliminated that. We are going to recover an additional 5%, but we're not requiring, we don't have the barrier of the requirement to recover 200%. And when appropriate, we can use master agreements. If we're going to do a lot of business with one industry partner, we can negotiate a master agreement so that we don't have to negotiate each time a task comes through. Another thing that was mentioned earlier is restructuring of our office. As we try to take advantage of industry relations, entrepreneurship, it only makes sense that sponsored programs, OTMIR, conflict of interest, broader impacts, STAR metrics, we all work together as a team to try to figure out how can we do this more efficiently? How can we do this better? How can we be more friendly with our investigators and industry to accomplish our goals? So now we all report up through Steve Wyatt in economic development. Entrepreneurship. We are working to create an infrastructure that encourages entrepreneurship. We have tools available out there, but we believe that we can improve on those tools, because there's no better story than we have a situation where an investigator has an invention owned by the university and says, you know, I think I can commercialize this. I think I can have a startup company that can be successful. We license that technology to the investigator. He becomes successful. Maybe the company gets acquired. Maybe it continues on its own, and the university starts to realize licensing revenue from that. The investigator's happy. Society's happy. There's a product out there that they're happy with. Everybody's happy. That's a win-win-win situation. And the federal government notices those types of things. We're going to promote those types of successes in forums like this. All right, so takeaway points is the value of partnering with industry going forward. Everybody benefits. Again, society, investigators, industry, MU. It will assist us in our ability to obtain funding not only for the industry but the federal government in the future. And the last point is, you know, OSBA is dedicated to working with the team I mentioned earlier to try and streamline processes and make things more efficient, more friendly with our investigators. Last slide's my contact information, along with 3 other all-stars in our office, Jill Ferguson, Karen Guerin, and Jamie Zabo. You can contact any of us at any time if you have any questions. Thanks for your time. If it's determined that we need to, the president's the one that's delegated the authority to waive intellectual property for the curators. So if we determine that we need an intellectual property waiver, if we have to go through that process to get that approval, we're going to ask for the extra 5%. I would work with Chris on that to look at the language and say,
we'd look at it. You know, can I just jump in?
Absolutely.
One of the reasons for the 5% is to create a kitty of cash that will help us in those cases when contracts fall through. So yeah, it's something other schools do. It's not an onerous amount of money, and I envision it mostly being charged to larger contracts that we're doing with larger companies that are not opposed to paying it. When we're working with smaller companies, you know, industry, faculty startups and so forth, that's a whole nother story. How we handle that is in a different way. But what I want to be able to do is create that bank account that when smaller companies fall through, we can answer the question, where do we get some of that money? And try to make it less onerous and de-risk some of that for us. Thanks for that question. Craig, I think there was one here from
Yes, sir.
Dr. Devon.
You mentioned the master agreement process. Are you working on a template to help us walk through and to promote that idea with companies?
We're not at this time, and not that we won't. I'm sure we'll work with Steve to
Do you think we should?
Yeah, I mean, if we can get a template out for them to at least see this is what we mean when we say master agreement, because I don't know if that's a term in industry.
And one thing I want to point out with regard to master agreements is we try not to include intellectual property language in a master agreement. And the reason being, and we say we want to empower our investigators to help us make that decision. So we may have Professor X that says, yeah, there's not going to be any intellectual property that's generated from this work. Well, what happens when you get a master agreement is that's the vehicle to get things done quickly. So now I have Professor Y who wants to do work with the same company. He may have a different situation. He may be generating some intellectual property that he wants to protect. And so if we waive IP in the master agreement, we're stuck with that for anything that goes through there, or we have to renegotiate again if we have Professor Y that says this doesn't work for me. So generally we will not include unfavorable intellectual property language in a master agreement.
But to follow up on your point, Steve, we are going to continue to enhance templates and so forth so that when industry wants to do business with us, that we have agreements that if they're willing to accept, we can go through very quickly so that they are more of a template. Of course, a lot of companies have their own templates, and so they want us to use those, and so those processes take a lot longer to negotiate. But just like at the university, we use the infamous consulting agreement. Anybody ever use the infamous consulting agreement? We all use that a lot. It's kind of a standard agreement. It allows it to go through a lot quicker. But then if somebody needs to have a special deal, it just takes longer.
I don't disagree with that, and I recognize we have to negotiate
Right.
those particulars. It's just from a, let's get the message out, this is where we're starting, because I don't know that a lot of companies know where our starting point is.
Right. And we will be going to work on those.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
As we transition right now, I might just say a few things. And that is, as we work with industry, Craig raised a lot of the challenges that we have. And yet, a lot of that is really in our own hands to take care of. So we talked about intellectual property and waiving intellectual property rights and so forth. We also talked about publication. And what we found in most cases is, as long as we're willing to delay publication, most companies will accept the idea that we will eventually publish. There are some times when we might want to engage in something that's highly proprietary, and when we do that, we have to really think about who's going to do that work. If it's a graduate student, as the chief of grad studies, I have to know that that graduate student isn't going to be in a position where they have nothing to publish. But on the other hand, if it's a small project and doesn't last that long, and it's something that will help to fund them while they're also doing something that is highly publishable, then we maybe can make it work. On the private use issue, the good news there is we have so many buildings that are so old that were paid for so long ago, there's no private use limitation whatsoever on them. Furthermore, in those buildings that we do fund with tax-free bonds, if we've put some of our own cash into the building and not used 100% tax-free bonds, then every year the percentage of total research in that building that can be done for private use is actually equal to the percentage of our own funds that we put into it. So at other universities that I've been at, they actually were very, very careful to always put in some of their own cash in every building so that they could maintain and retain, even in the newest buildings, a certain amount of private use. So all of these things actually are pretty well understood and something we were able to deal with pretty nicely. And so I wanted to assure you that we've kind of worked through most of those challenges. I'd like to introduce Jen May now, and Jen is the director of our Confluence of Opportunity Office.
It's pick your favorite name day, or whatever you want to call it. I appreciate that one much more than some of the others I've heard over the years, so thank you, Dr. Foley. I want to take a few minutes today to talk about navigating opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit about COI. But if you really want to get into that topic, come back next time, because we're going to spend a lot more time on it then. I know that's everybody's favorite subject. But today we're going to talk about all the different types of opportunities that are out there for individuals to develop their research program. And some of this is going to be a little bit repetitive. Some of it's going to be probably something you've heard before. But we wanted to make sure that we were setting the stage and setting the framework and really grounding not only all of these ideas, but grounding the idea of industry-funded projects right there in the middle with how they fit within this entire world of funding your research activities and your portfolios. So let me just set the stage for how I'm going to go for the next few minutes here. I'm going to be painting with a really broad brush, so you'll have to excuse me on that. We're going to talk about kind of big overarching buckets of the types of funding sources that are out there. So that being said, none of this is really absolute, and I think we've already started to talk about that a little bit today and how we develop these kinds of contracts. Everything's on the table, and that's no different really for a lot of these types of things, but I wanted to give you a framework and really set the sense of the broad areas that are available to you, what distinguishes them from one another, and then how we can use them as a starting point for more conversations about your specific portfolio and what you want to do in your research activities and how you can blend them together. So we really want to take this opportunity, today's conversation, the last conversation, the next one, as a starting point, a jumping off point for us to have more personal Let's Talk sessions, one-on-one, to discuss about what you want to do, how you want your research program to move forward, and where you want to go with that. So in that vein, and on those notes, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'm going to put funding into two big, broad categories. The first being grants, and the other being contracts. So if we start thinking about them in terms of the vehicle we use to get the money in the door, grants or contracts, that's where we want to start today. So we're going to look at grants first, and this shouldn't come as any kind of surprise to anyone. Again, most of this won't. But we wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. So grants, very typical type of vehicle you'll find for federal funding, a lot of types of state funding as well. Really, you're going to submit a proposal to a public type of a sponsor. That could be a response to a very broad type of proposal category within your discipline. Kind of bring us your ideas about what you want to study, and we'll see if we can fund them. These sponsors are probably either going to be government agencies, or it could be other types of more public entities. And again, this is my big broad brush that I'm painting with here. But what I mean there is that some of them could be foundations, like the Gates Foundation. Others of them could be more topical type associations, like the American Heart Association, something like that. But at their heart, the money that we're using is either taxpayer money or it's some sort of donation money. So it's really public money. We want to try to build the goal here is to build early stage, probably very likely basic research questions, but could be some light level early stage applied questions, but really to advance the scientific area that's being studied. The agreement that the university is going to engage with the agency won't be governed by the federal procurement rules. And that's a really important distinction between grants and contracts, and that's why I put those buckets out there for us today. The federal agencies aren't really looking to buy a product or a service. They want to advance the science and fund the science and your hypothesis within that, with the ultimate benefit of hoping to benefit society and get that information out into the world and into the other labs around the country and the world to try to push the science forward. In terms of parameters around it, it's generally pretty open. There aren't a lot of parameters around grants. Participation, you can generally use whomever you want. Grad students, postdocs, other faculty. You can pretty much put the team together that you want to put together to do your work. You can and are highly encouraged and sometimes even required to publish, publish, publish. You want to get this stuff out the door. It's meant for the public good. It was supported with public money. So we want to try to push those outcomes out there. And whether or not those outcomes are good, bad, or indifferent, they really want to know what happened in your activity. It's meant to test a theory, and it's meant to tell the public what happened when you tested it. Now, of course, that's not to say that every journal is going to pick up something that doesn't have any kind of significant scientific value, but we all know that. We understand how that process works. But the intent with the funding was to push the science forward, get the information out to the public so that the next stage can happen, the next development can happen. So that's kind of grants in a big nutshell, and that's something that a lot of our faculty are very, very familiar with. The university's been familiar with for a number of years, and it's where we have set our history. Now we're moving into something that's a little bit different. But I wanted to step back and take a look at a kind of a unique flavor of industry-funded research, and it's those research funding projects that are publicly funded but are coming through industry to us. So you may have heard the word flow through. So the industry got the government grant, the government funding in some sort, and so now they're pushing out a piece of it to us to do some of that work. That's what we're talking about here. These tend to be a bit more defined, and as we walk down this road, everything's going to get a little bit more defined. What the agency is looking for is to achieve something with the research activity where they've engaged the commercial industry. They wanted the commercial industry to be a part of it for a reason. There's something out there. There actually probably is a product or a service or something that they're wanting from the commercial entity. And so the way that they're going to engage with those entities is through the federal procurement rules. And who's familiar with those? Who's ever heard about the federal acquisition regulations? And if you're at the last session, you did a little bit, I know, because I know Craig brought it up. But the FAR is out there, and that is the vehicle that they're going to use to engage industry, and then industry is going to push those same clauses down to us in order to engage us. The FAR really just kind of ranges the gamut. It is far and wide in terms of the types of things that it covers with dealing with these types of dollars. It could address issues from addressing payment and invoicing items, utilization of domestic or foreign providers, accounting standards, all the way down the road to things that maybe we're more familiar with in the academic setting, which is publication, use of certain individuals on the project, security issues, those types of things. There's volumes upon volumes of the types of clauses that are out there that could be applied. And all of the contracting officers at the federal level are directed per the agency and depending on the source of the funding, what needs to be included in those contracts, how they need to be put together. So there's going to be parameters, and exactly what those might be is going to vary a little bit, but it's going to probably address who can work on the project. So it's very possible that maybe not the entire team that you had originally envisioned when it was a grant might be able to work on these projects because they can go so far as to restrict nationality, for example. What will happen with the deliverables? What's going to happen with what you want to publish and whether or not it can be published? What must be published? What can't be published? And also what has to be included in those publications. A lot of times we'll see clauses in these types of agreements that say you need to indicate in your publication that this was funded by X agency, and here's how we want you to say it, too. You can't just put it in there. They want it a certain way. So it can be very prescriptive in that way. And also the outcomes, and Craig mentioned this earlier. What are we going to be able to do with those outcomes? Can we use them for anything other than this particular project? Can we use them in the classroom? Can we use them for future research? Depending on the money, depending on the source, depending on the agency, those types of things are going to be in play. The good part about these particular types of agreements is that we know what the FAR clauses look like. We can get to them. You can get to them online. You can see them all. And we have a great experience in OSPA working with the FAR, working with those clauses, and understanding what a public institution like Mizzou can and can't agree to and when. So when we work with industry on this kind of stuff, we can go to them and say, hey, the money is ultimately coming from here. here are some of the parameters that we know that we have to deal with, and we can set the stage going forward and work with our industry partners to understand what we can and cannot do in these types of arrangements. So that's industry funding where there's a federal or some sort of public money flow through. But this is what we're here to talk about today, right? We're here to talk about industry-funded projects. These types of things can spring from just about anywhere, and that's really the unique and kind of fun nature of them. You know, industry isn't going to be bound by some sort of public source of money. They're very likely going to be using money that's within their own coffers. But they're going to be looking to contract with Mizzou directly to help them answer a question or solve a problem. There's some sort of a deliverable, is the technical word for it out there, but that's what they're really trying to do. They're trying to solve a question that they have. They need our assistance. They need someone on our staff to help them do that. There's a whole variety of ways that we can get engaged with them on that, and we've talked about a little bit of it, and we're going to continue to talk about it today. Could be past connections. You may have worked with them on a federally funded project that was a flow-through type project, and now they're ready to fund that with some of their own money to move the science forward in a more applied kind of way. Or perhaps we've got a consulting relationship. You've had a consulting relationship with them in the past, and now they're ready to engage with the university, engage your lab to do some work for them. Or it could be connections that have been made by our administrators and others like Steve and Dr. Foley over the years who actively go out and try to promote the types of things that we can do here at Mizzou and what we're good at. So they can really come from just about anywhere, and as I mentioned, they're going to largely be applied. They're really not about trying to advance the science. What they want to do is answer a question that they have, so it's going to be an applied type of research activity. Since the money is coming from their own coffers, those parameters that we talked about before are going to get even tighter. And what those are going to look like could be a variety of different things. And we'll just have to wait and see once we get that agreement from the industry to know where they're at and where they're thinking. So I want to pause here just for a second and say, you know, you might look at this and on its face or just kind of your initial reaction might be, this kind of sounds bad. I don't want to do this. This is something that maybe sounds more restrictive. But I would caution you to just take it all in and say, you know what, it's just different from grants, because quite simply it just is. It's just a different type of funding line. It's a different type of opportunity. And that's what we're talking about today, or navigating these different types of opportunities. Both have benefits, both have challenges, or all three really have benefits, all three have challenges. And so in the long run, what we want to do is try to work together to figure out what makes the most sense in your portfolio. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But I do want to just take a moment to mention here a couple of the things that we've started talking about, and we can talk about them more specifically as they relate to your specific research project, was how we engage with industry with this. And in the past, what we have done, and what we typically still do today, is we let the industry come to us with their draft agreement. So unlike the last set of industry-funded research projects that we looked at that had a federal flavor, and they had the FAR, and we know what the FAR is, and we know what we can do, we don't necessarily know what kinds of clauses we're going to get from the industry sponsor until we see that draft contract. That's what's going to take us a little bit extra time. We have some ideas. We've been doing this for a while. We have a lot of great people on our staff that have seen a lot of these types of things. So there's not a lot that's usually a surprise, but it's how they're phrasing it, and we need to take that moment to look at it and really define what it is that they want us to do and go from there. So it can take a little bit extra time, can be a little bit more drawn out, but here's where we really want to engage you in the process in ways that we haven't done before. We want you to be a part of that process too. There's nothing magical about us doing it behind the curtain. We want to bring you in and let you see that contract, let you see the types of terms that are there, and the IP terms are a great example of that, and it's our starting off point. We want you to be engaged with the IP terms to know what it is that the industry wants, know what that would mean for you down the road, but it's going to be the same for a variety of other clauses too. And we're working on ways to try to continue these educational efforts, continue the ways that we can engage you and work with you closer to develop those types of things. Now, we have developed, in response to some of the talk that we had a few minutes ago, we are looking at the ideas of developing a potential master's standard agreement. We have a standard research agreement for those maybe smaller companies that don't have those kinds of things. We can have, and we do have tools that we can jump off from. We also have the new 2-page short form that deals with intellectual property, if we know up front, we're going to want to let that intellectual property go. But it has a lot of our terms in there that we know that we have to have, and it's something that we can move very, very quickly with if industry is comfortable with that. But a lot of times, at least right now, we're still in that early phase, and maybe they're not, and they want to go back and forth, and that's okay. That's what we're going to do. But just so that you know, that's going to take us a little extra time when we have to go back and forth like that. So I want to just bring up one, as a taste, real quick, a nuanced category, as I like to call it, of industry-funded projects, and I call it your industry-funded projects. And what I mean by that isn't the industry funding projects that you're going to get. It's when you want to fund something here at Mizzou, when you want to bring a project from your company that you've developed here to Mizzou to work with your lab or work with others on campus. And what is that going to look like? So this is my shameless plug for our next session too. We're going to have a lot of those today, but it's a really good session that we're going to have in a few weeks on December 18th on entrepreneurship. And we're going to talk about all the things that we've been talking about a few minutes prior here, with the idea of the parameters, what those contract terms are going to look like, how those things are going to be addressed, but it's going to have a very unique flavor because it's all about you and about your company and what you want to get done. And then we are going to bring in conflicts of interest because that's where that really does hit, the rubber hits the road with those kinds of things. So we're going to talk about all of that kind of stuff. We can talk about it certainly between now and then. We're always available to you. But that next session I think will be a really good one, a really exciting one. So just to wrap it up, what I want to do here is just remind you, I painted with a very broad brush today. But what we want to try to get to is a point where we're thinking about and considering balancing your portfolio. What's that going to look like? All of those types of funding opportunities are different. All present benefits, all present challenges. And so how is that going to fit with what you want to do? There are lots of other things to consider too, in terms of not only your funding sources, but what are your other obligations? What's your career path? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? Do you have teaching load? Do you have grad students or postdocs that you're trying to nurture and bring along? There's lots of other factors that we need to consider, and we know that this isn't a one-shoe-fits-all kind of a thing, and so this is where we really do need to have those one-on-one let's talk sessions so we can discuss what you want to do. We're continually working on new tools to help support these efforts. One of those is an example, and following on with the IP conversation we've been having, so we're working on a new online tool to help with that review. We've talked about it in the last session, we talked about it again this morning, that we want to engage you in that process, in that review process. But what's that going to look like, and what's that going to take? Well, we're trying to develop this online tool to help guide that process, guide that conversation. We hope to roll that out pretty soon. It's coming along nicely. But we certainly know, too, that online tools are no substitute to talking face-to-face. So we want to encourage you still to come and talk to us about that. We're going to help walk you through those things and help you try to balance all of this into something that you're comfortable with. Maintaining your independence is important. And, you know, it's really something that as a faculty member at a university, you have a really unique position and a unique role. You get to come to work every day and decide, what do I want to study today? What sounds really interesting? What questions are being presented to me in the science that I want to pursue? And that's something that's really unique. And here in Columbia, we sometimes, I think, lose sight of that. Not everybody gets that opportunity to come to work and really set their own day and what that's going to look like. But I think you can balance all of these types of things, sponsored activities, consulting activities, and it's all going to come full circle, as Dr. Foley mentioned earlier. The more of these types of interactions you have, the more diversified your portfolio can be, if I can steal a term from the financial sector. The more engaged your research project, your research portfolio could become. So that's really exciting, but of course it's something that we don't want to make you feel like you have to do. I think this was something that we mentioned in the last session too. These are opportunities. That's what we're talking about, navigating opportunities, not mandatory. We know that this isn't going to be something that fits everybody's ideal, and so we want to talk about that when we want to do what's right. I would be remiss if I didn't say that we really do want to promote integrity here in all of this that we do. That gets at the heart of everything that we are, what Mizzou is. We're here to benefit the public good. We're here as a university to push out information, so we don't want to lose sight of those types of things. But I still do really feel that all of these things can balance well together and bring us a really robust community and a robust university. So I'm available to you. Here's my contact information, and you've got that on your handouts too. I'm over in Mizzou North right now, feel free to come by. We'd love to see you. Otherwise, I'm happy to come back to campus and visit with you anytime that would be helpful for you. So I'll open it up for a few minutes of questions if we've got some time.
Jen,
Anyone
thank
has
you
any?
very much. That was excellent. Questions
Perfect.
for
I answered
Jennifer?
all your questions. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for this talk, and I'm really wondering about the issue of something, for example, related with industry-funded projects. Think that I'm a researcher and I'm doing industry-funded research, and I have a contract. While I'm doing a research, I come across suddenly an issue that I need to research more. And it's not in the contract, it's my own inquiry or my own thing to do, interest.
Sure.
So am I eligible to do that? How can I deal with that? What will happen
Sure.
if I do that?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I will point out that I'm trained as a lawyer, so my requisite answer is always, it depends. There's never an absolute. But I think you'll find that you'll have a lot of opportunity to mix those kinds of things. What we would want to do is take a look at what your obligations are under the contract that you have. What kind of a time commitment does that require of you? Maybe where you're at in that process. We'll also want to look at the IP terms, maybe. That's something we need to think about. Did we already give that away to them, that we need to go back and work with them on that? Or is that something that's a brand new idea and it's not considered in there, and so we can pursue it on our own? And then what types of other funding opportunities could we help you find to pursue that next idea? And where would those come from? And then how would those play in? So my answer is yes, there'd be opportunities to do all those kinds of things. We just need to make sure that we balance it and have everything sorted out for you so that you don't get into a bind. Okay? So bring us those ideas, bring us those questions, and when we can help you work through all of that kind of stuff. That's what we're here for. Yeah, we got a question in the back. Dana's coming.
Yeah, sure.
That's a great point. Absolutely. So, if you didn't hear the comment, great comment, that sometimes it can come from another direction. Maybe we were the lead on the project and we went out and engaged industry to work with us to help us solve a problem that we have or a question that we have with the project that we need to have answered. And so the relationship came from that direction. Great comment there, and that is absolutely true. These things can come from a variety of sources and a variety of ways. All are good. All are opportunities for us to continue to march forward and work more closely with industry in a variety of ways. And I would imagine, I would guess, and I would hope that the more we do with them, we'll have more of those types of mixed up, it comes from us, comes from them, comes from another source, and it's all over the place, and we're really just engaging in a lot of different ways. So thank you for bringing that up.
Those are great comments and questions. I'm going to underline a couple things that Jen said as we make the transition now to Steve Wyatt. I'm going to underline, I really like this idea of a balanced or broadened portfolio. The idea that you can have fundamental research going on that's funded by the NSF. You could have more applied research going on that's funded by, let's say, a Monsanto or a Boeing, all at the same time. And you can do those things. I've done it myself and know lots of people who do it. And at the same time, I wanted to underline that, there are folks who don't want to do any of that, who want to just, like the idea of working with NSF funding or just NIH funding and not being connected, if you will, to industry or corporations. And that's fine. We have no problem with that. What we're trying to find and identify, though, are those few people, maybe, or more than a few people, who are kind of interested in this and would like to give it a try. And we can work through all of those issues with you that come up as they come up and help you to determine the path forward. So thank you very much for that. I think that really got to the core of some of the things that we were talking about. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Wyatt. And Steve, I don't know what you're going to talk about exactly, so I'm going to be highly engaged to hear it.
I don't know either. No. Just kidding. Thank you all for being here. And I'd like to take you just a little thought pause, like a commercial. And I want you to imagine if the last conversation that you might have had with a spouse or a significant other or a coworker where you said one thing and it was totally clear, but they didn't take it that way. Anybody ever had that experience? Maybe you had that experience this morning with your spouse or a friend or a coworker, and you're just sitting there going, where in the world did they get that from what I just said, right? We've all had those experiences. And a lot of times that occurs because we think different, we have different maybe backgrounds, or where we're at, or the words we use send off little red signals in the back of our head, and we get upset, very upset. Well, if you think of that experience, I want you to keep that in context when we think about engaging with industry or business. Because here's what you need to realize is there are cultural differences. And cultural differences is really fertile ground for you to have misunderstandings. And they can happen very easily with the best of intentions. So how do we deal with cultural differences? And probably the best example I can give you to kind of help set this context is several years ago, ended up helping take a trade mission to Japan. We were taking American businesses to Japan. And of course, there are cultural things that we do in the U.S. that are very natural, that if you go and you engage with a company in Japan is different. And you wouldn't think anything about them. Some of them are very simple. For example, here in the U.S., when you're going to have a meeting and you're sitting in a business conference room, you want the most important persons at the two ends of the table, right? Makes perfect sense. When you end up and you're in Japan, guess what? It's the middle of the conference room is most important. And so those individuals who sit there typically are the CEOs. Now you can see how very easily an American wanting to sit at the head and somebody else sitting different, and people having very different experiences and expectations. The reason I share that is as we think about working with industry, you have different cultural perspectives. And the way that you are able to move forward is to understand where each other is coming from. And that's very important. So those of us that work in a university setting have our own culture and how we see the world. And industry has a slightly different culture. I'm not saying one is bad. I'm not saying one is good. They're just different. Just like that conversation you had with your spouse, significant other, or coworker. Just a different perspective. So how do we begin to understand? Well, there is an organization called the University Industry Demonstration Partnership. This organization, the University of Missouri, is a member of that. So you are a member of that, those of you that are within the University of Missouri. And this organization is made up of major industries, major companies, whether we're talking about Siemens, Mattel, John Deere. I mean, you can go through a lot of those different companies. And it's also made up of major universities. So what's the purpose of the university? Of UIDP. The objective there is, how do we overcome cultural barriers? Now, they don't quite say it that way, but that's kind of the context. So what they do is they take problems, they put together teams of university representatives and industry representatives to sit down and say, let's seek to understand and come up with tools. So I'm going to give you a homework assignment. You'll notice on there that there is UIDP, and there is a book like this. And I'm going to send this around so you can see. And you can go to that website, and you can download this book, which is a resource guide for industry and for academia. So one chapter is, what is it that the academy needs to understand before dealing with industry? And then there is a chapter about industry, what do you need to understand about the academy? And I think it's a wonderful tool if you're beginning to have conversations with industry to use. Now, I know some of you will make assignments, and then your students will want to go read the Cliff Notes, the short version. There is also out there today a little quick guide. So if you don't want to read the full book, that's fine. But there is this little quick guide that looks like this, and I had some copies made of them, which walks you through some of these elements of difference of opinion and how you might seek to understand each other in order to have a very successful relationship and transaction. So I would really encourage you to pick up one of these at a minimum. Use it the next time when you think you're getting ready to have that type of discussion, because our objective is to try to help you do that. So let's talk a little bit about some of these. This is going to be kind of just an overview to give you a flavor of understanding what some of those differences are. So if you think about it, collaborative research may accomplish what is not possible in any other way despite varied missions, cultures, and motivations. That's why we're interested in doing those types of collaborations. There are things that can happen when you pull together industry in the academy or businesses in academy to accomplish some things. But you also need to understand that as you begin to come together to accomplish things that are nearly impossible, you're going to have some challenges. So let's think about that. From an academic perspective, you need to understand the industry's mission is to provide goods and services, expand the state of the art, and to create value for their investors. That's part of who they are. Compared to those of us in the academy is to understand that the institution's mission is to educate related creations and disseminate that knowledge and outreach. So here you have the academy's mission, and the industry's mission may be slightly different. So it's very important to have a preliminary discussion to understand what is those expectations. So yesterday, Jim Gann from my office, Jim, you might wave, we're working with a couple of faculty members from different colleges who are in the process of trying to build a partnership or collaboration with a private sector company. So here you've got an engineer, you've got a nurse, and you've got an IT company. All three of them sitting in the room. So guess what? Part of the first part of the whole conversation in this discussion got off onto, why do I do this? And so the faculty members were talking about what got them up every morning was to improve the lives of individuals in their latter years. In other words, how do you improve the quality of their life? And they get up every morning thinking about it. That's what gets them up and excited. Well, guess what? This company is very much interested in the IT issues of seniors and those at the latter parts of their life. And it was interesting, the discussion, because what came out of that discussion is they had the exact same motivations. And it was a very interesting conversation because they spent that time there understanding what their values were, what was important to them, realizing that they had this common desire to accomplish something that neither side could deal with without having that type of conversation. So as you think about that, when you get ready to have a conversation with industry, it's really important for you to spend some time talking about what's important. Faculty members were talking, yes, we want to do this business deal, but guess what? We want the money to expand our research agenda. We want to continue to be innovative. And you have the businesses talking about, we're interested in this because there's nothing more valuable than to be sitting there helping them implement this in their home, and all of a sudden having a grandmother be able to Skype and for the first time see her grandchild that she has never seen, and watching the tears roll down her eyes to hear that baby coo, and realizing what that brought to the quality of their life. So you can see how important it is to have those types of discussions. So let me just hit a couple of others. So that's kind of when you're talking about managing expectations and gaining understanding. The other thing is to look at the benefits and challenges. There are a lot of benefits, but there are challenges. So Time. How do faculty members measure time? Anyone? By semesters, right? How does business measure time? By dates, right? And they have very strict timelines because guess what? They need to get a product. They need to get a problem solved. They need something like that to dealt with very quickly because guess what? They have to respond to their investors on their return on income. So that on investment. So that all becomes very important. So understanding what a timeline. When you're sitting down having a discussion, we deal with a lot of federal grants. Guess what? It may be year, 2 years, 3-year project. Just get the report in each time, you're fine. Well, if you're dealing with a company, it may be certain deadlines when they need to launch something. So that changes how we deal with it. And so you've got to have those types of discussions on how to move that forward. I use cultural once again. So for example, in that trade mission, one of the things that we cautioned a lot of companies, many American companies, very much when they would go to Japan, what did they want to do? They wanted to hurry up and start talking about business. That was their culture. I want to get yes, I want to get a purchase order, and I'm ready to get the deal done. Well, the culture of Japan is different. They want to build the relationship. They want to get to know each other, to build trust, and so many of these other things before they're ready to do the deal. Once again, it's trying to understand how you move forward. So the other thing, establishing contacts. Who are we going to be working with? Understanding how those pieces all fit together. And knowing who you're engaging with, how you're going to manage it, and so forth. One of the areas that's really important is to develop the proposal. What are we going to do? And to make sure you both come to terms on what it is we're going to do. What's the timeline? What's the scope of work? And laying out the technical aspects to make sure that as you all are collaborating, working on this, you have a clear understanding. Because remember, it's very easy to use words that mean that are the exact same thing, mean things that are entirely different. And what we're trying to do here is share with you the importance of having a successful collaboration. The other thing, and these are some of the practical aspects. How do we do federal grants when we do budgets? We put in the salary. We put in the fringe benefits line. We put in the supplies or whatever. And then we add overhead because that's what the feds want. Many times when you're dealing with businesses, that's not really the appropriate way to do the budget. It's much more better to do fully burdened labor rate. They just want to know what's your cost per hour and how many hours. So that means you're calculating things slightly different. And you may not be putting down an indirect rate. It's just a different way of what is a custom. So understanding how all of that takes place is very important. We've talked a little bit about this too, intellectual property, an important thing. Because guess what? They may want the intellectual property, but you've also got background IP and other things. So having conversations about it. So as you begin to think about all of this, your mind may be going, oh my goodness, there is so much here. How would I ever be able to process that? One of the things about culture is when you build a good culture and good relationships, it makes everything work well. So part of what we're trying to do through these talks and some of the reorganization is to build a culture where, guess what, we're here to help. So at the point you want to begin to engage with an industry partner or that begins to open up, we want to come alongside you and help you navigate that, to be your backup and support to help you accomplish your goals of trying to build this industry research. And that's why we're working to kind of enhance how we approach that. And we'll be looking for your input on that. In the last few minutes I have, I wanted to step back and broaden your perspective on what an industry relationship looks like. So, oops, wrong button. There we go. So at the last UIDP conference, just a few months ago, it was out at MIT, And Dr. John J. Tracy, who is from Boeing, who is the Chief Technology Officer for them, did a presentation on what they saw as the model for industry relationship and what it looked like. And industry research was a big part of that. But I also want you to think about it in a higher context. And yes, by the way, this is his copyrighted presentation. And yes, I am giving him full credit for it, and I haven't completely. So am I okay with fair use, Chris? I'm just kidding.
You made it public.
Okay. But anyway, what I want to do is I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's not going to have a lot of detail. But what I want you to understand is when we think about industry relationships, a lot of the things that have happened at the federal level in wanting to build long-term relationships and to aggregate together teams is also happening at the industry level. So it used to be we'd go try to just find this grant, that grant, and all of these other grants. But now they're beginning to be aggregated in where the federal government's wanting to have longer relationships and so forth. So a lot of companies see that as well. So here's what he said were the characteristics of a strong partnership between industry and the academy. So one of the things he talked about is going all the way back with the deep roots. So MIT and Boeing were working together. They had collaborations at the beginning of aviation. So talk about a long partnership. But what he was emphasizing is if you really want to build a strong partnership, realize that what you want to do is begin to talk about the long agenda. How do we go about building a long relationship and instilling that and allowing that to grow? Now, it's very hard to, if you didn't have a relationship with a company, go, well, that was 100 years ago. How in the world do I do that? Well, you start today to build a relationship that can continue on to some of your colleagues in the future. The other thing they talked about is when you're trying to build a relationship between industry and the academy is you really need to think about what your mutual interests were. So they were trying, MIT was very interested in controls. Here they were trying to build a underwater vessel that would allow them to explore very deep in the ocean. And so those controls and that technology was really important. It made a really good collaboration because both of them were wanting to accomplish the same thing, except Boeing was wanting to figure out how to get that completed very quickly to allow them to execute a project. The other thing that they talked about, that not only do you want this long-term relationship, not only do you want to find things that are mutually beneficial, but you also want to include the talent pipeline. So think about it this way. So MIT, the lady up in the upper left-hand corner, was a professor that they wanted to hire at MIT. But guess what? They called up Boeing and said, look, this is a person we want to hire at MIT. But here's what we want to do. Boeing, we want you to hire them for a year and put them to work for you. Because we want them to understand the challenges of industry. We want them to understand what the issues are and what some of those problems are so that after she leaves working for you in a year, we will hire her, but that will help us build a stronger research agenda. And guess what? That's exactly what they did. She went to work for Boeing for a year. At the end, she was hired at MIT. And guess what? When she started, she was already primed to have a strong research agenda to begin to start moving forward. Another thing, so not only are we talking about the research, we're talking about the talent pipeline, and dealing with the faculty. If you go back to the other, where they were sharing their knowledge, they also have student exchanges that are working there. The other thing they did is MIT built a leadership, kind of what you might think of as an executive leadership program designed just for Boeing. They built this program, and currently they have 50 Boeing teammates who are alumni of those. Now think of these middle and upper executives who have been trained, worked with the professors and everything. Guess what that does for their long-term relationship? It strengthens it. Not only are they interested in that, but they're interested in research. So they ended up negotiating this master research agreement that they've had. And guess what? It has continued to grow because all of these touch points, it's grown 3 times since this 2004 level. Couldn't quite get the dollar amount, but we knew it was in the millions. But that type of interrelationship in designing projects has been very beneficial for both. Not only is it just the relationship with the PI, but to have this type of institutional relationship is from top to bottom. So guess what? Every year, their president and the chairman of the board of Boeing meet at least once a year and just talk about that relationship, where they both, what their needs are, where they want to go. The deans meet, the dean along with the senior VP of engineering meet at least monthly, if not more, talking about the strategies within the College of Engineering and what Boeing is wanting to do. Their head of their department meets a lot more frequently. Then you start getting down into other levels. What they said is so important is to have multiple levels and deep and have an entire campus engagement. But it doesn't just stop with that. It also expands into philanthropy. So guess what? This is a program they have where they invite in minority students from all across the country that apply and come. Boeing helps them fund it. A large portion of those end up going to MIT. And then guess what? A lot of them, when they graduate, end up getting hired by Boeing. The university wants to increase their diversity. Boeing wants to increase their diversity. It's a collaborative project of what takes place. Guess what? This is their formula. So the real reason for me sharing this with you, as we begin to grow industry research, we want to start thinking about how do we build strategic partnerships with key companies that can be mutually beneficial, that respect each other's mission and values and goals, and yet we can accomplish some things that neither Boeing could accomplish alone, neither MIT could accomplish alone, but they did it together. They built those deep roots. They looked for mutual benefits. They looked at two-way talent pipelines. They built leadership development, strong commitment from all levels. They engaged and they built those philanthropy activities. So that leads me to my final thing in closing. One of our objectives in trying to bring together OSPA and economic development and managing of the conflicts of interest and broader impacts and all those things is to really create this type of strategic business and industry collaboration place where we can work with you to help build those collaborations and also be a door that's very easy for industry to come in and to work with us so that we're working together in order to accomplish things that none of us could do apart while maintaining our integrity and objectives of what each party is trying to accomplish. Last thing, make sure you pick up the little guidebook as you begin to move forward, or the other books. I think you'll find those as great resources as you embark on your collaboration with your industry partner.
Steve, thank you very much. I'm getting more excited by the minute. How about a few questions for Steve? Steve?
You talked a little bit at the beginning. I compliment you on the message, and I'm really excited by it as well. But one of the things that you talked about earlier about the difference in terms of how we calculate the cost of a contract, federal with overheads versus a flat rate,
A fully loaded like labor rate.
and I guess the question I had is, are you saying that we can now do that kind of a contract, a fully loaded labor rate contract? Because every time we've tried to do that in the past, we've always gotten stuck back into what's your direct costs and here's your overhead rate. And you're right, it always raises a question when you're talking to a business.
I'm going to let Craig step in. I believe we can do that where we...
Yeah, there's no reason we can't engage industry in that way with fully loaded rates. Now, internally, we may have direct cost and overhead, but that can be invisible to our sponsor. You know, we can give them just direct rates.
It's a new day.
There's nothing to prevent us from doing that.
And part of that challenge is making sure we respond to what our customer is accustomed to. And so when you think about a fully loaded rate, sometimes faculty members get concerned, well, that's not really the way it is. It's this and it's indirect. Well, that's the way we pull things together for the feds. The private sector does things sometimes very differently. So we might need to prepare budgets and record invoices that way, but we may have to do internal calculations differently. That is not violating our integrity or trying to do something inappropriate. That's responding to how your customer seeks to receive information.
What we can't do is overcharge, right? So we have to use standard ways of calculating those numbers and being able to demonstrate them, unpack them during times when we're audited, but there's no reason why we can't do it. I think there's a question in the back.
I had a contract last year with Bayer, and they were able to do that. They gave them a loaded budget.
That's Sheila Baker. We'll have to have you up front here to talk sometime. That's good. The MIT model, I know there are probably some people sitting here saying, we're not MIT. We're not going to get there. Wrong. We can get there. We absolutely could get there, and we have our strengths, and there are reasons why companies want to work with us. We could do it. MIT has just perfected this over 100 years. They're ahead of us. The great news, though, is that it doesn't take 100 years to get there. It just takes a bit of change and tweaking with our internal systems and our own thinking to catch up and to be just as competitive. And in our areas, and our areas are not the same as theirs, and that's fine. So I really like the fact that you brought that up, and we're going to keep pursuing that.
And my point about MIT is you say, well, I'm not an engineer. That's fine.
Yep.
The intent there was not to say this is just about engineering. The intent was to look at the attributes of that relationship, apply it, I see Judy back here for nursing. So applying those same principles in the healthcare industry. There's several companies there that we could build those relationships. But you pick it, but think about long-term, how you might be able to build those types of long-term strategies.
Those relationships are what we see in our European colleagues' relationships with industry year over year. Right? What MIT has done is basically to adopt that European model. And it's not surprising because they were pushed there by companies like Boeing, who work with European universities all the time. And for years, I've heard my colleagues in industry come back and say, why can't you be more like Eindhoven? Why can't you be more like Louvain? Why is it so hard to work with you? We'd like to keep the money here in the U.S., but we just can't work with you. We can't live like that anymore, folks. There isn't enough money to continue to support our mission. We have to broaden how we do things. Steve, thanks very much. Great overview. All right, we're going to move now to Chris Fender. Chris is going to talk to us about the spectrum of industry and university interactions and modalities and so forth.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'll talk a little bit about why, and we've talked a lot about this already, but why industry is interested, why are we interested, and what in the different ways an engagement with industry can look like. And you may be asking, why is the IP guy talking about that? Well, at the end of the day, the outcome of these interactions, whether we waive IP or not, really is that piece of intellectual property. And it may be in the form of a patent, it may be data, it may be confidential information, copyright, what have you. But that outcome is going to be realized as a piece of property that has value for that company that they can then sell, they can trade, it can be bought. And so when we think about an engagement sort of with the end in mind, then we can structure that engagement to still accomplish a lot of the goals that the university has. I guess I like to have a little bit of a visual reference as to what the landscape really looks like when we talk about industry-sponsored research. And sometimes I think there's, maybe things are pigeonholed into, industry-sponsored research is all one thing. And we'll talk about a variety of ways that industry is interested in. It's not just one thing, but it is all centered around, sort of our culture and our mission. And these missions are teaching, research, service, and economic development on our side. And there is overlap with the industry's interest in profits and moving new products into the market that they can create value with. And finding that overlap point is really what we're trying to do here today. And that doesn't mean that everything we do is going to be in that overlap point. But there are some things that can be in there, and developing a framework to make that happen. So again, why is industry interested in university and working with a university? And it can be about discovering new technology. We've talked a lot about maybe fee-for-service contracts and things like that, which we'll get to. But at the end of the day, the industry is interested in always finding new products that they can and commercialize. It's based on new technology, and so they're interested in the discovery process very much so. Now, they're maybe not funding as much discovery-based research as maybe they once did, but they are interested in it, and that's why federal grants will always remain important, because they want to see where the trends are going with new technology, and then de-risking that technology. Being able to determine which technologies are going to result in products, which still have problems that need to be solved. And so industry does take, I think, a keen interest to these types of things that are happening. And then they also would like access to some very highly specialized expertise. They know that they don't have the capabilities to have all the expertise under one roof in their particular company. But universities have some very highly specialized expertise that can help them solve problems. And we just sort of to the last point, we were talking about cost-effective R&D. It is cost-effective for them to engage with a university for a lot of reasons. It is a competitive sort of environment. There's a lot of outsourcing now in R&D, and there are contract research organizations, CROs, out there that are somewhat competitive, but we offer a different set of values for the work that we provide, and that has an attractiveness to industry as well. And one of the things that I think is really important for our mission is, in the industry, they need the best employees. We've heard this from multiple companies that come in, and they want, as much as anything, to be able to identify the top students in a particular area that they can bring in and help create value for their company. And so this engagement can be sort of a conduit for that, and I wouldn't want us to, I don't think we can overstate the importance of that. And a lot of companies, they are interested in advancing the body of knowledge in a certain area. And I would point to, a company like Monsanto that I used to work for, actually, is maybe suffering the effects of not advancing the knowledge, generally speaking, about the area of genetically modified organisms. And so they are interested in more general, esoteric types of things, and seeing that the things that the university does in education and service also help our society understand new technology, and so that is important as well. And then they have philanthropic goals as a corporation that are important to them as well, and a lot of that we can help them meet those goals, obviously. And we spent a lot of time already talking about why are we as an institution interested in engaging with industry, and really it boils down to, I think, any time we look at these things, does it fulfill our mission? And our mission is fairly clearly stated. We want to train students. Education is a big part of our mission. We want students that leave the institution that can hit the ground running with a company, and companies want that as well. And so we need to know what they need out of our students so that we can better train them to get those kinds of jobs. Research and seeing that the results of the research that takes place here is able to create a positive societal impact is very important to us. Serving the needs of our stakeholders and constituents, our service mission and extension, working with industry, helping companies keep employees locally that they have is important to us as well, and the economic lift associated with that and with helping them succeed. And as already been talked about, there are reductions in state and federal support of research, and it is within our goals to show measurable return on the investments that we do have so that we continue to remain competitive in those areas. So what are the different ways an industry could interact with the university? And this is, these aren't discrete buckets. It's really a continuum, and it's sort of based, as I said earlier, on the outcome of that engagement. The intellectual property ultimately that will develop from that. And a lot of times, historically, we think of industry-sponsored research as, discovery of a new technology. They need to find a new product, and in my area, in tech transfer, historically, that's what we helped facilitate was new technologies developed. We would license to companies that they would then turn those into products. And I sort of look at this as a fishing expedition. And again, these are probably becoming more and more rare for industry to sponsor these kinds of works, but there are still some of those examples out there today. Where they are interested in some general exploration of a new area that might lead to new and useful technology. It could involve de-risking new technology that they already have. Maybe sometimes they've acquired technology from another institution through a licensing process. We have some expertise that could help them de-risk this. And you see a lot of SBIR, STTR funding that really is centered around this area. For startup companies that are commercializing new technology, they're able to get some of that funding from the federal government and to make that technology more attractive for commercialization, and then engage with the university and some specific expertise to help them do that. And I know in the entrepreneurship seminar we'll likely talk a lot more about SBIRs for those that are interested in starting a company and how you can use that as a vehicle for financing that. And then general problem solving. As we talk about, there's a lot of specific expertise. They may have a problem with a given area, and they need some help solving those problems. And this sometimes comes, oftentimes as can be a project for students. And I would say, at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the student IP policy. A lot of times you'll see companies come in and they'll want to sponsor a capstone type a course or experience for students to solve certain problems. And it requires some discernment, I think, on both sides to make sure that the problems we're putting in front of students are the right kinds of problems for them to solve. Because we can't, our policy does not allow us to give away the students' IP rights. If they develop something as part of their student experience in taking a class that they're paying tuition for, they get to keep those rights. And we've enacted that policy now and to protect the students. And so the companies that might want to come in and do that kind of work need to know that up front as well too. And so, some discernment around being able to pick the right kind of problems, the right kind of projects for students versus what's going to be a better project where maybe we need to be more protective of confidential information and things like that, and can be accept a little bit more restriction on publication for different kinds of problem solving as well. Fee for service is another area that we commonly think about. Clinical trials typically fall into this kind of engagement, but other areas as well where we're testing a product maybe they have, or we're validating a product that they want to commercialize that it does do what they think it does, and some of the expertise we have here can help them accomplish that and collect data that then helps them support the commercialization of that product. And then open source innovation is one that isn't talked about a lot when engaging with industry, but they are, I think they are interested in the advancement of knowledge in a given area, and you are seeing companies now have different types of open source kinds of programs where they want to see what's out there and what the trends are, and they'll provide some support with no expectation of really immediately commercializing something. Now, there may be something that they can see from that results from that they want to then put some resources behind and develop into a more proprietary project. but they are supportive in a lot of areas of different ways of open source innovation, and I think we should be open to that as well. And then ultimately, any kind of relationship is really a combination of any of the above, and we're looking at, how do we put together a package that represents a total relationship that might include corporate philanthropy, it might include sponsored research, some discovery-based research, or some actual problem-solving research. And so, again, there's a lot of different ways that we can engage with the industry. Now, ultimately, what does it mean for you as a researcher? Can you work with competing entities in a given area? And this is a really big question. It requires a lot of meticulous record keeping and things like that. If somebody's paying you to do a piece of work, there's an expectation there that they get the full value for that, and that they're not going to pay you to do somebody else's work for them as well. And so being able to manage different companies, and again, CROs do this well all the time. They work for some very strict competitors, but they're able to manage that, and I think we can too, again, picking the right kind of projects for the right kind of situations. And then ultimately, one of the things I think is important to keep in mind is, how does engaging with industry help you accomplish your research goals and objectives, as well as teaching objectives and training students? And is it going to enhance or detract from your ability to compete ultimately for non-industry sources of funding as well? One of the things that's important about publications is the credibility that establishes for the faculty member to then go out and compete for new sources of funding. And so, again, we're not trying to force people to do one way or the other, but say there's really an open palette of ways that we can engage with industry, and we think we can put together relationships that help you accomplish your goals and help the institution fulfill its mission as well. And so now I wanted to sort of transition. We have Dr. Kwan here from Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he's had a really interesting project with Raytheon. And I'd invite Dr. Kwan to come up, and I have we kind of envision this part as more of an interview. I have some questions that he can answer and talk a little bit about his project with Raytheon. But it's an example of one way that we've seen a real positive interaction with industry. And it's actually an example where we didn't waive any IP, actually. It was IP that IP that Dr. Kwan had developed, and we have patents filed on, and Raytheon is interested in commercializing that and advancing the technology around that. And so, Dr. Kwan, if you want to come on up. Sure. The microphone right here. We can, I guess, share the microphone. So, and
you can probably show me the slide. Well, yeah. I mean, this shows. Yeah, that'd be great. This slide shows briefly about my story. But anyway, I'm Jay Kwan from Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. Looks like I'm the only one who available this morning. I know many other, great people out there with a successful story, but anyway, I'll be happy to share my story with you this morning. So first, do you have any questions?
No, maybe just a little background from
Sure.
your point of view about the project.
This whole project starts with my invention, actually, back in starting 2006, and filed all the patent 2008 or 9 around the time. And then I publish, and the companies start giving me kind of calls, and then I talk with many companies, and I had many visitors and so on. And then it was kind of difficult to have a final agreement to start a project with a company, but I ended up getting a good partner with Raytheon. So eventually I start a good project with them, because we found a mutual interest, and then we found a common goal to achieve. So that's how we move forward. And then, like Steve mentioned about the MIT case, probably they may have similar situation. So everybody have probably involved in their have a common goal maybe to achieve and start to move on. So my plan at the beginning was to have a long-term relationship, not just only short-term, a 1-year, 2-year project and just done. And then just like the university case, and starting with a small project, and then build up a good connection, and then introduce them to, other very excellent people at MU, and expand their program with others. So that's why every time they're here, I, invite many other people, and then having a meeting with them and so on to expand the program. So speed-wise, it may not be high enough to, increase the size of the relationship immediately, but eventually it's, getting really kind of growing. So our goal is actually to have a product out there, and then we're selling the product to all of the country and all of the world probably. And to have that probably one of their company unit maybe moving into the town, and then we probably can contribute to the community here, and also it may affect the state situation, finance situation probably, maybe. It may increase the, job, or I think it may have a lot of positive effects. So that's how we start the relationship and then move forward. And then we are currently in the middle of the plan. So if everything goes well, probably we'll be reaching down at the final destination.
Thanks, Jay. So that's a little bit about how the project came about. How is it advancing your research objectives?
It was actually, and industrial funding is a little different from government support because they have a different perspective and different goal, probably. And at the beginning, it took some time for them to, be a little bit positive with us. Because we probably would not be MIT, probably, like Hank said. If we are MIT, probably they may immediately decide, maybe. So they spent some time to learn about me and MU and what we are doing, what kind of policy we have, and how easy to work with these people here and so on. It took about more than a year, close to 2 years, actually. So, but I didn't give up, and they didn't give up. So somehow, they just kept going. And my program director personally, he visited here town before we start the project, actually, about 10 times to find out, who we are, actually. He didn't know where the University of Missouri was and so on. Anyway, but now we become a very good customer, actually, very good collaborator. So that's how we can grow up. So this can be a very good starting point to increase the, good effect. But the project objective-wise, we had a little bit of misunderstanding at the beginning because we have a different perspective. I'm a scientist. I want to do a more kind of research types of things, and they want some more product-related kind of stuff and so on. And also, it may take some time to adjust our mutual interest. But once we have some common interest and a common agreement, and we have a common goal, from the time it was very easy and smooth. And then but there are lots of rules and policies and so on, and I'm not still familiar with, but we have a very good team here, OTA, MIR, OSPA, and so on. So you can always, ask them to get, where to go and how to deal with those kind of things. So, so project objectives are going smoothly now, but in the middle we have some difficulties, just like other research other research projects. It's not, always going as you wish. So we had a problem. Well, they know the problem, and we report them how we're going to solve the problem and so on. They just wait, and then we solve the problem. They're happy about it, something like that. So we got a very important progress, and they're very happy about it, so we are still kind of moving forward. So we are still have a kind of blue light for their final destination.
So what is the interaction typically, or is it like typically for between you and the company? What would researchers expect to want to, how much interaction? You talked about them visiting a lot, but
right.
Is there a lot of interaction, or
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more than an interaction between me and NSF program director, definitely. It's really kind of hard for me to, open up a discussion with the program director in DARPA, NSF, Army, and so on. But here, these people, they want something from us. So it's easy to open up a discussion further. So they know what I'm doing, and that's why they're coming. They're knocking my door. So it was easy. But at the beginning, it was not much different from the funding agency like a government unit, right? So it looks like a government officer, and they're just stating that we want this, and you have to finish this within some time or something. So, but it's as time goes by, our relationship gets mature and so on. So we know each other. Now we become like a friend. So we're not just doing a project for them. They're not just expecting something from us only. So we're just going out together to find out more funding opportunity from the government agencies together, something like that. So it's not just, funding agency and researcher relationship now. So it's much more than that.
So what advice would you have for faculty that are interested in beginning to engage with industry and maybe they haven't had a lot of interaction in the past?
Yeah, well, I think everybody knows about the situation out there, so nothing will be easy. So, but it will take some time in some cases, and you have to be patient. But for my case, actually, because it started with my patent application and so on. So especially IP stuff, I wanted to protect it first. But all depends on the types of relationship you're going to build up with a certain industry. If you don't have to worry too much about the IP, situation might be a whole lot different way. But if you just want to do a similar way I'm doing, then you probably want to protect your IP first, probably, and then publish, right? So that's how they know what you're doing. And then you persistently to work with them, to ask them to work with. So that might be the kind of short kind of suggestion.
Thank you very much, Jay, for coming and sharing that.
Oh, well, sure. My technology is about a nuclear battery. It's not explosive. It's not using a nuclear fission reaction. So it just uses a radiation only to generate the power. So it can last very long time, theoretically 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, and so on. But it sounds very fancy, but there are lots of difficulties, to solve. Lots of scientific research components in there. That's why they're spending some dollars for us. Any other questions?
Has your collaboration with the industry enhanced your publications in any way or helped with your publications after you got into the collaboration, increasing impact factor, anything of that was positive outcomes for your program?
Right. That's a very good point. Like you saw related stuff on the slide previously, like other industry, they have a limitation as well. Okay, but it's not impossible, actually. There's some steps in the middle you have to go through. It means it may take some more time than no rules or no policy or no restriction. There is a restriction, but for my case, it probably like 30 days ahead of the time, of submission. So you just need to send it to them. They have to agree with all the contents. If there's something in the middle they don't want to show other people publicly, they just want to delete, and they'll just let us know. And something like that. It's not really kind of terribly difficult kind of way to deal with the publication. They know why we are here in the university. University is kind of publishing everything, every single thing, every time. So they know all their, biology in here in the university. So that's fine.
Any other questions? And I'm sure Hank's got some comments too, maybe.
Sure. Are there any questions for Jay Kwon before he sits down? Okay, Chris and Jay, thank you very much. So Yeah. So we're a little over time, but not too many people have left, so that's really very encouraging. And, you know, as I sit here listening, I just get so excited. There are more things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk about those just briefly, and then we'll finish up. One is big grants and contracts. We would all like to see larger grants and contracts come to Mizzou. It just makes so much sense, and it's sort of the next level we need to get to here in our development. NSF Engineering Research Centers, for example, ERCs are something that we all covet and wish we could have more of. The kind of work that Jay Kwan just spoke about is not just the kind of work, but the kind of relationship you need to have pre-existing in order to be able to put together a team that's really competitive for something like an NSF ERC. Similarly, for an NSF STC, a Science and Technology Center, you've got to have those relationships with industry to be able to prove that when the time comes, you really can translate the products of the research and development that the NSF is funding out to the marketplace. So really, just terrific. Those pre-existing relationships, those longitudinal relationships, those end-to-end relationships that Steve was talking about, where the company has an interest in Mizzou all the way from hiring undergrads on through to doing research with us, on through to philanthropic interactions with us, are really terrific. And the kind of work that Jay Kwan spoke about is the kind of work that leads to all of those things happening and happening nicely. I also want to point out that numerous times in my career and in careers of colleagues that I've worked with in centers and so forth, I've heard industry leaders or industry researchers say to me, you know, we want to give you the money to do the research that we wish we could do in our laboratories, but we can't because of the pressure to produce results quickly or because we're doing work that's not fundamental. So I could say for sure that depending on the company, if it's a large enough company and they have enough money, so to speak, not a small company, but a company like a Monsanto or a Boeing, that in fact they can engage you in very fundamental research if in fact you have that relationship. Oftentimes that relationship stems from someone reading your publications and realizing how important that work is, and it's a researcher in the company that comes to you then and says, you know, I'd really like to support your work. Oftentimes, if you're shrewd, what you do is you find a way to get that person involved as an outside committee member, and then as they become an outside committee member for your PhD and master's students, they become a real collaborator with you, and then things really start to take off and work very, very nicely. That leads me to co-ownership of IP. It's often overlooked, but in fact, in all of our standard contracts, even the ones where we, especially the ones that we've used for 30 years, where we retain the rights to the IP, Clause 2 has to do always with the fact that there may be co-invention. In other words, your industry sponsor may have a person who's so deeply involved in research with you that they're actually a legitimate co-inventor. I've had numerous cases of this in my career. I have 15 patents. A good number of those are co-invented patents with people from DuPont and other companies. Because we're working so closely together, they were in fact colleagues, right? And when that happens, it's sort of interesting. All of that other malarkey that we worry about all the time about the intellectual property goes away, because now it's co-owned by the university and also by the entity that's providing the funding. I think Chris was the one who spoke about access to top students. Whenever that comes up, and I get it all the time from industry reps will say, we want access to your best students. How do we get access to your best students? You know what I say? I say, give David Braun a research contract. Get to know him, right? He'll help you find the very best students in biology, right? Get to know Jay Kwan. Give him a research contract or a gift, right? He'll help you get to know the very best students at the undergraduate and graduate level. and it works out really, really well. Now, another thing we've got to cover, and I think Jen touched on it, is, yes, Jen, is consulting versus a research contract. Some things you should do as a consultant, not as a research contract, right? It just makes more sense. And I, by the way, I am encouraging people to go out and consult. I feel the opposite of those people who see it as a conflict of interest. It's good for us if you're out there consulting and they're actually paying you $1,000, $2,000 a day. That tells me that we've got really good stuff here and they want to bring it out there. I'm not jealous of it. I want you to go out and do it. I wish we had it on the books that said officially you could do it one day a week. It doesn't say it in the books at Missouri, but every other school I've ever been at, it's one day a week. I hope people will take advantage of that and go make those connections. Now, there's sometimes when you want to bring something back to your laboratory as a consultant, and there you've got to be careful, and we've got to guide you. If you're going to do that, we have to worry about who's going to do the work, and frankly, you have to pay for access to the equipment. So don't do the wrong thing there. Tell your colleagues to do the right thing and keep it clean. Right, Jen? And we can do that with you. We can help that happen. The issue of multiple sponsors. Boy, I've had multiple sponsors. Again, I've seen colleagues with multiple sponsors. The key thing is to keep it separated, right? So I could be working with Roman Haas at one point on their absorbents and doing some fundamental research with them. At the same time, I had money from ExxonMobil for doing something completely different over here, and money from the DuPont company for something, again, very different, and money from the NSF and DOE, right? You can keep it straight, but you have to keep it straight. Not that hard to do. What I've always marveled at are my colleagues who are engineers who do, have some sort of computational method. And it seems to me they sell the computational method 10 and 12 times a year to different people, and yet somehow it all works out. I've seen examples where, not me, but a colleague was, in fact, a computational kineticist, and he was working on complex kinetics problems, and both Mobil funded him and Exxon funded him at the same time, even though they both had an interest and it was core to them. Of course, eventually they merged, and so it didn't become such a big issue after that. But before that, they understood. Everybody understood that both companies were funding this research because it was so fundamental and advantageous to them. And in fact, they hired most of the students who did that work, right? So again, kind of a nice thing. Gift versus contract also comes up a number of times. Please don't go out and negotiate a gift when it should be a contract. When you do that, you're really just taking advantage of the system and taking advantage of your colleagues who do it the right way. We have to pay for the lights, we have to pay for the water, we have to pay for the heat. If you bring it in as a contract, all those things get factored in. If you bring it in as a gift, you're subsidizing your own research at the expense of others. So that's something else we need to cover with you. But with that in mind, I think we've covered a lot of terrific things. I'd like to ask all of you to join me in a round of applause for my colleagues over here. Just outstanding. So I think we've covered most of the things that I wanted to cover today. I know Steve has one or two more things that he would like to finish up with, and I'll let him do that. But let me thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Please tell your friends and colleagues about these meetings. We're going to do them again next semester. We're going to continue to grow and refine our thinking about this. Steve?
Okay. Just a couple of real quick announcements. One of those is this has been the second in our Let's Talk series on industry and funded research. If you are interested in exploring the entrepreneurship path, we're going to have a Let's Talk on December 18th, 2014. So come back here and hear that session, and we'll cover some of those topics. Some of you may want to take a deeper look into entrepreneurship. There are several things that are taking place at MU right now, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about that. I think we got this brochure that's out on the tables, but it is the MU Entrepreneurship Workshop that is put on by the Missouri Small Business and Technology Development Centers, and Chris and Steve, you all might wave if people have questions and want to talk to the two of you all a little bit more about that. But they're hosting some little 1-hour informational meetings just to give you some awareness. So if you're not sure if you want to explore entrepreneurship as a faculty member, check it out. It's a very easy way. They are about 1-hour sessions. There's one on December 4th, a couple of them on December 4th and on December 10th. But if you pick up the flyer. Then in addition, if you want to take the next step, you've dipped your toe in the water and you go, I think it feels good, I want to take the next step, they will also be having a little bit deeper session, about a 4-week. And then if you say, I'm all in, I'm taking the dive off of the high dive, I'm going to take the plunge, then they have got an 8-week session, 8 weeks where they actually take you through the entire process of thinking about your entrepreneurial venture. There's also some pitch presentations, and that's to help you get more comfortable pitching. And if you're thinking about possibly going and applying for some of the System Fast Track 1 or Fast Track 2 funds that are available to help take products to market, this experience would be great with you to help kind of shore up your knowledge as well as practicing some of those pitches. So that's taking place. The other thing that I also wanted to mention, I don't think I have a flyer for that, but the Coulter is doing a boot camp as well, and they've been working, that's primarily with medicine and medical devices. And I was trying to see if there was anyone here. Chris, do you have any additional information on? They made slides. I don't think on the Coulter one. Jerry, you may know what's going on with the Coulter workshop. So could somebody get a microphone really quick to Jerry?
There is it's called a Coulter boot camp. It's I think a 6-week series that really is intended to help faculty prepare competitive applications through the Coulter process. It's a very fundamental educational approach to engaging with translational research. And the flyer's available. I can send a link to you, Steve, and it can be disseminated widely. It's already being disseminated in a number of forums. Thank you.
So, big message, we want to help support you as researchers. We want to help you to grow your federal research. If you want to explore the industrial side of the research, we want to be there to help you move that forward. If you're interested in wanting to take some of the ideas that you have and take it to the marketplace and create your own company, we're here to help you as well. And I think in closing, we wanted to open up if there were any last questions that anyone happened to have with anyone, starting all the way. If you've got conflicts, we've got solutions, right?
Oh.
Or if you've got questions about research or anything else.
Don't leave yet. We
got some prizes. And last time, several people's names got called, and they weren't here, and they missed out on a Corvette. No, just kidding.
Hey, I also wanted to point out that all of these have been recorded. Is that right? And so, Dana, where can they find these recorded sessions?
Essentially on the research.missouri.edu website. We're not up and live yet, but they will be there eventually. We'll send a notice out.
Great, great. Okay, so Dana, what should I do now?
We have 3 prizes. We have a pair of tickets to the Arkansas game
All right.
28. We also have a pair of tickets for a concert series. And then we have a lunch buffet for 2 to the University Club. So we'll have 3 winners, and you'll have your choice.
Okay, here's the first winner. Gwen Gray. Not here? So sad, too bad.
If you know Gwen, tell her she won a Corvette, but she wasn't here.
Nancy Parker. Oh, Nancy, which of the 3 gifts would you like to take? She took the football tickets, folks. Okay. Our next, oh, this is blank.
It's probably just that.
All right. Here's our next one. Brenda Leuenberger. Brenda Leuenberger. Brenda, come on down. Woohoo! Brenda, which of the 3 gifts are you going to take?
The concert
You're taking the concert. Okay. So this last one then will be for a delicious lunch with me at the University Club. Kidding. Margaret Lang. Margaret, where are you? Too bad. So sad. Tell Margaret she missed out. Raghu Kanan? Okay, I really won't be at lunch. Okay. Liang Zhu. Leon. Yay! All right, terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, that completes the session for today. Thanks very much. Tell your friends and colleagues about us, and we hope to see you soon again at the entrepreneurship meeting. Take care. Have a happy Thanksgiving.